Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm so sorry that we're a little late starting, but technical hitches occurred, and I think we've now got through them all, so huge apologies for that. A hugely warm welcome to today's APPG on Women, Peace and Security event on gender and the legacy of the war in Iraq 20 years on. My name, for those who haven't met me before, is Fiona Hodgson. I'm the co-chair and I run the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Women, Peace and Security. And we run a whole series of events in this APPG that focus on UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and the subsequent Security Council resolutions on the Women, Peace and Security agenda. We highlight the disproportionate effect that conflict has on women and girls and the essential role that they can play in conflict prevention, peace building and post-conflict reconstruction around the world. We highlight the successes and challenges of this agenda, and we try to emphasize the gaps and where we could do better. But we're delighted that we're running today's event with ICOP, the Influencing the Corridors of Power project, which is hosted by SOAS and led by Professor Alison Scott-Bowman and former students and staff of SOAS. Because by bringing researchers and Westminster closer together, I understand that ICOP aims to serve as a model for the higher education sector and democracy more generally, and it also provides the Secretariat for the APPG on communities of inquiry across the generations, which aims to facilitate intergenerational evidence-based discussions on equality and identity. So I'm very grateful indeed for this partnership, and I'm particularly grateful to Sanjana, who has done a lot of work putting today's event together. Because today we are looking at Iraq. It's 20 years since the US and the UK invaded Iraq. And in the years in between, the country has struggled. It's experienced political and economic turmoil and great insecurity due to flaring ethnic and sectarian tensions. As always in conflict, women suffer disproportionately. And we all watched with horror as so many Yezidi women were taken and enslaved, many as sex slaves by ISIS. It was absolutely horrific. Personally, I have visited Iraq twice, and the last time was to observe the Kurdish referendum in 2017. And this has given me a little insight into the challenges of the situation. However, today we have real experts here, and also in the audience, people who've worked in Iraq and lived in Iraq, who will speak with great depth of knowledge. So it's a huge welcome to everyone. Before I just hand over the chair, I would like to say that in the House of Lords, we've got some votes this afternoon. So if you see me and Baroness Nicholson running from the room, it isn't because we can't stand it anymore. It's because we have to do our duty and go down and vote, but we will be back. So I hope you will excuse us. But I would now like to hand over to our chair for today, who is Professor Lina Khatib, who is the director of the SOAS Middle East Institute at SOAS in the University of London. She's an internationally renowned authority on the Middle East and previously served as the director of the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House, where she's now an associate fellow. So Lina, with great pleasure, I hand the chair to you.
Thank you very much. I think I might do that.
Yes.
Well, first of all, I'm really glad to see so many people come. 20 years after 2003, we're still talking about the invasion of Iraq and its implications for today, as well as zooming in on the very important issue of women in this context. So, of course, today's event is on gender and the legacy of the war in Iraq 20 years on. As you heard, I've been working on the Middle East, both in the think tank world and now in the kind of academic sector. I've been doing this for a very long time. I remember 2003, I was teaching in London at the University of London at another college. And we told our students at the time, if you want to just go protest, don't worry about class, go protest. And in a way, we did not think at that time that, you know, here we are 20 years later, we would still be talking about Iraq as a place that needs healing. On the plus side, women have been playing a very important role in this healing, and that's one of the things that we're going to talk about today. Whether Iraqi women, whether women from outside Iraq, like some of the people I have here with me around the table, we all are committed to making things better for Iraq's various communities. So without further ado, I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is going to be Pari Ibrahim. She is the founder and executive director of the Free Yezidi Foundation. She will be followed by Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne, who is someone I first met through Chatham House, and I know your commitment to Iraq as a member of the House of Lords and also outside. Then we'll hear from Ruaa Alghannam, who is joining us from Mosul. She is a civil activist and officer with Muthabarun Al-Khair Foundation, which is an NGO in Mosul. And last but not least, we have Zainab Mehdi, who is a London-based journalist whose work I've been, following for a long time, and finally I have the pleasure of meeting her in person. So we're going to start with Pari Ibrahim, who's joining us online, as well as Ruaa is with us also online. Pari, obviously, the situation of the Yazidi community in Iraq is at the heart of the challenges that are faced by Iraqis, by Iraq, and of course your work is very important. So I'd like to hear more about the work that you're doing, as well as the interventions from the international community when it comes to the Yazidi community in Iraq. So over to you.
Thank you very much, and obviously thank you for including me to speak today. It's a huge topic for me, as I think many times I think back on the situation of Iraq during the time of Saddam. My family and I, we fled in 1991 because of the Saddam Hussein regime. So we were always afraid of that he was a dictator and would kill anybody on his path. But 20 years later, after the invasion, much has happened. In August 2014, the Islamic State grew stronger and committed a genocide against the Yazidi community, which we are 9 years later still picking up the shattered pieces to ensure we can support
Pari,
our
can you hear us? Sorry,
yes? I can't hear you anymore.
Oh, sorry, can you hear us now?
Now I can hear you.
Sorry, there was a bell, so we couldn't hear you. So if you wouldn't mind just repeating.
Okay. So yeah, in 1991, my family and I fled for the Saddam Hussein regime. So after 20 years of the invasion.
I'm so sorry, Pari. Let's just wait for the bell to stop.
Sorry, this is democracy. I know it's noisy, but it's just working in a way.
Yeah, so sorry about that, Pari. Hopefully, third time lucky with being able to deliver your remarks. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, no worries. So in 2014, the Islamic State advanced in Sinjar and committed heinous crimes against the Yazidi community, killing the men, kidnapping women and young children. Older women were killed immediately among the men. when this happened,
Stop you again because this bell is persistent.
It's the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I'm not too scared to tell Pari to do this. Okay, let's hope this time it will work without interruption.
okay. Do you want me to start over again, or what should I do?
Oh wait, yeah, just carry on. We heard a bit about your family, but then the bell starts. So
Yeah, so since the Islamic State committed genocide in 2014 against the Yazidi community, we've started on the ground. I started the Free Yazidi Foundation in the hope that we could do something for the Yazidi women and girls. When I came there, I said, okay, the situation is going to at least take 10 years for my people to recover. Well, we're now in the 9th year. We're almost in the 10th year. Unfortunately, the situation of the Yazidi community is still the same. I wish I had something else to say, but unfortunate, it is not the case. When we look at justice and accountability, there have been 3 cases on genocide in Germany, very few convictions related to crimes against humanity, but around the world and in Iraq, you don't really see a lot, especially justice for Yazidi women who were raped by the Islamic State. In many cases, people are aware of judicial authority, law enforcement. They are aware of the enslavement that a perpetrator committed, the rapes that were committed against a Yazidi woman or girl, but unfortunately, most of the time, we only see terrorism charges. Excuse me. We only see terrorism charges, and that is not justice for the Yazidi community. Our work includes justice and accountability. We do crime scene analyses in the hope that we can find and gather the evidence that is necessary to ensure that there are convictions of perpetrators who committed these horrible crimes. Aside from justice and accountability, we do a lot of work to ensure that the mental health of the survivors is where it should be. A lot of these women and girls, they escape out of captivity and they come and live all of a sudden in displacement camps, nothing but a tent. And what we try to do is give them mental health care. We give them opportunities to learn and be educated. A lot of the women are illiterate. Some of them never been to school. And by providing them a chance to education, even if it is basic education, you give them their right to get an education, to be who they want to be. For many of the women and girls, this is something totally new. After basic education, we try to see if we can give them opportunities and training in the Enterprise and Training Center. Our Enterprise and Training Center, the idea is really to empower women economically. So, for example, we have the Junkie Animals line in our Crafts and Enterprise. This is I'll just show you quickly. They make these beautiful junkie animals. They crochet these. I don't want to say like, oh, look at what kind of great idea I came up with, but the thing here is that these women are now making these items, and in the first half of this year, they made around $20,000 of income. These are women who before never worked, never had an education, never had any say in their families, and now all of a sudden they are the breadwinners for their families, and they are actually earning an income and creating their own rights, and are an example and role model for many of the other girls. We do the same thing in our Sugar is Sweet bakery and cafe. We open the bakery and cafe. We train the women. We give them opportunities to learn new things, how to bake, how to start your own business, and what you should know and understand to earn an income. A lot of the women who suffer after genocide, all they do is sit in a tent and look in front of them and have nothing more to do than just think about what happened to them. And you want to change that. You want to make sure that they do not wait for handouts, because that is how the humanitarian aid nowadays works. People are just waiting for handouts, and hopefully they'll get something, and many don't because there's not much. So what we try to create is an environment where they are strong and they believe in what they can do. And honestly, I always say, like, if FOF wouldn't exist, and believe me, we're getting like closer and closer, since there's not much funding anymore going towards Iraq. Like, yeah, 20 years after the invasion, there's a lot of issues, specifically issues towards women, from gender-based violence, from horrible crimes committed by Islamic State. It's the Yazidis, but many others as well. After all these years, you just look at the women and you don't see a difference, and you just try to find ways to make sure that they want to live a life. They want to be independent. They want to understand what their rights are. And we as an organization really try to do that. Even with the Yazidi Survivors Law, our team is working daily to ensure that the survivors get something out of the Yazidi Survivors Law that was approved in Iraq, to ensure that these survivors get what is rightfully theirs as survivors of these heinous crimes.
Okay,
I mean, I could go on and on
yeah,
about this, but
I think we can follow up on some of these issues, and we will. Thank you so much, and I'm glad the bell finally stopped. Considering Baroness Nicholson is still voting, I suggest, if Ruaa is still with us on the line, I can see her camera is off, but Ruaa, if you're there, give us a sign. Yes, you are. If you wouldn't mind, Ruaa, going to you next to talk to us about the situation in Mosul. Today, of course, Mosul was liberated from ISIS around 5 years ago. I had the pleasure to go to Mosul shortly after, and I'm curious to know from you what the situation is like today, as well as, of course, your own work in the city for women. So go ahead, please.
Yes, first of all, I'm glad to be with all of you. And really, you and all the team must welcome to come to Mosul. To be honest, my name is Ruaa. I'm from Mosul, Iraq, working with international NGOs and local NGOs, volunteer teams from the liberation ISIS war at the July 2017 till now. I'm working as officer with Muthabarun Al-Khair as women empowerment and for women empowerment side. We are working as from the beginning of after the liberation war from ISIS till now. We are working for the one dream, and try to achieve separated goals. Will make our community will make our community or our future. It will be a bright future, or building our community again. From the first step, if I can talk about the first day working as a volunteer from at 2017, we are hurrying up to provide the people with very important items that that they need, like especially water, food, clothes, and some of medical treatment. To be honest, we couldn't forget the very good hands that we received from the United Nations, that they hurrying up and sending emergency mobilize a health center, and we guide them, we help them to find the people that they need the health.
Can you please just pause because there's a bell.
I'm sorry.
There's a bell ringing, so we can't hear you. Just wait a little bit.
تمام. Then
انتظري شوي لأنه في جرس عم برن. ما بعرف إذا سمعتي.
تمام. Then
بعده عم برن الجرس. هلا بقول لك لما يوقف. اوكي وقف. عفوا هيدا جرس التصويت بالمجلس، فلما يرن لازم يروح النواب يصوتوا، فنحن ما فينا نسمعك، بس هلا وقف. اوكي go ahead.
Then all of us were working together to and put in our mind and how we can rebuild our society after the.
بدي ارجع وقفك. ارجع عم برن الجرس.
Now then I go ahead.
والله ما بعرف والله يعني. مثل ما صار مع باري 4 مرات. اوكي لنجرب، بعتذر تفضل.
No. Then we put in our mind how we can rebuild our destroyed community and
للأسف رجع بلش.
Sharing experience.
رؤى المفروض إن شاء الله يكون آخر جرس. Okay.
Then we put in our mind how we can rebuild our destroyed society and how we can make it in the way that it was. Then, first of all, first step that we are working on it is to remove the rubble from the roads, open the closed roads, and try to guide the mobile health center to the people that they need health services. Then after then we worked, we grouped we worked as a groups in different areas to support different people after the liberation, because you know there is a lot of people, they need support and they need hands. And you know, if there is any thankfully any
Let's hope we get Ruaa back. Okay, very sorry that the line seems to have dropped, but I've no idea if it's from Ruaa's side or if it's a connection issue on our side. It must be her side because I can still see Pari connected. Yeah, okay, so okay. Oh, is Ruaa back now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, we lost you there. This time it's the internet.
Then we put in our mind the same our dream. It's to rebuild our society and having a new life, respect each other without any those crashing and it's damaged in what that happened under the ISIS controlling, without the heat of speech. Respect each other, respect all the people that live inside the Mosul city or inside Iraq, totally, and we are put in our mind those targets and how we can achieve it. Really, when I'm talking about it now, I'm talking easily, but it's not easy. We faced a lot of challenges in the first of working on it. Mosul contain a lot of different backgrounds. There is a Muslim, Shia, Sunni, and Christian, and Yazidi, and Turkmen, Sabi. All of you will never find it in another governorate inside Iraq. All those people, they are living before 2003 under the umbrella of Nineveh, and there is no any troubles between each of them. And there's no groups. We are walking and living for 100 years before, especially with the Christian, and therefore there's a lot of situations happens, and a lot of destroyed of communications between those different groups, and therefore there is no one can support other, and no one can help other. And when is this coming? It's this communication is destroyed, and there's no any communication anymore. And after the liberation, we try to reconnect again. This reconnection is not easy. Is not easy mission for us as a volunteer. To be honest, we sat together and try to make different projects, different concepts to how we connect, how can we connect other groups, and how we can work together and sit together and make all the relationships, friendship relationships, as what we have before. Therefore, we are working in different points. The first one, how we can respect each other and respect the traditional days, traditional arts for each group. How we can empowerment for women economical side, because after the war there is a lot of women, they don't have any opportunities, they don't have any support. They are waking up with a lot of responsibilities as a householder, because before she shared it with maybe with her father, husband, or brother, but after the war there's no one of them. Then she faced a lot of maybe challenges in her life. Then how we can support the woman, how we can support the youth to find new opportunities for them life, how we can help the children, especially disabilities, and how we can work together. Especially we are focusing about this words together to rebuild our governorate again, because each of those groups participate a very important point inside the Mosul city. Then we are working with the different NGOs, international NGOs, and working with them as a partner with the different projects to achieve those goals. And if you find the logo for Muthabarun Al-Khair, you will find a green leaf with a face for a human. It's our target, our dream, to create a new life, living in peace with all the people inside the Mosul, and respect each other, and rebuild our community, and empowering the women and youth.
Thank you, Ruaa. That's wonderful, and I'm sure I'm not the only one in the audience who is noticing the great synergies between what we heard from Pari and what we heard from Ruaa, which I hope we can talk about a little bit later. But let me turn to Zainab, because Baroness Nicholson is still voting. So Zainab, you've done a lot of work on climate issues in Iraq. So I'd love to hear from you about, again, the role of women in this particular context with all the climate challenges that Iraq is facing.
Thank you, Lina. Should we just bit closer, or it should be okay? Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to ICOP and the Baroness for the invitation to be here today. Before I go into further detail about how climate change issues have affected Iraqi women in today's society, I believe it's important to talk more about the various factors which have played a role in the deterioration of Iraq's climate. And I want to start off with factors pre-2003 and factors post-2003. Two factors which I can talk about today, pre-2003. First, we can talk about the first Gulf War of 1991, where Iraq invaded Kuwait. And it was during this time where retreating Iraqi forces burned more than 700 oil wells, which led to approximately 60 billion barrels of oil being spilt in the process. While these events didn't have a direct impact on Iraq per se, it did have an indirect impact in what was yet to come in the years to come. Second, we have the destruction of the Iraqi marshlands in the 1990s. During this time, former president of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, was in power, and he was leading a very oppressive regime known as the Ba'ath regime. This regime was oppressive towards the Shiites and the Kurds in the country, and it was during this time that the Shiites and the Kurds were rebelling against Saddam Hussein's regime. The Kurds were fortunate enough to receive support from the US. However, the Shiites were less lucky, and they were seeking refuge in the Iraqi marshlands in the south. And they were actually seeking refuge in the inaccessible reed beds, which were hard to access. And to capture those who were hiding, Saddam Hussein drained the marshes, and by 1991, 90% of the marshes were drained. And of course, this had a very catastrophic effect on the environment, whereby the entire environmental landscape had been destroyed. So we see the deterioration of fungi and algae. We see fish dying, birds disappearing, and as a result, this affected the livelihoods of the marsh Arabs, otherwise known as the Madan, because their lifestyle depended on rice cultivation, buffalo breeding, fishing, and so at this point, both men and women are left with very little options. One option being they either stay and rebuild a degraded landscape. Second, they accept resettlement somewhere else in Iraq. So yeah, we see the migration of marsh Arabs from rural areas to more urban areas. So we see people migrating from the marshes to Basra, and at this point, there is a lot of competition amongst those who are living in Basra. Marsh Arabs are competing for the same jobs or going to Iran. And just moving on to post-2003, I'll go into further detail about the impact that it's having on women, but I do think this is a crucial topic to talk about, just giving some context before we go into further detail about the impact that climate change is having on women. So some other post-2003 factors are the US invasion of Iraq, the focus of today's event. It was not only a violation of international law, but it was also an environmental disaster. Sometimes when we talk about interventions, we tend to forget about the environmental cost that these interventions are having. And personally, I would say that the invasion had both a direct and indirect impact. So the direct environmental consequences are the disposal of toxic waste, being disposed of carelessly, and the impact that the weapons had on the health and ecology. An indirect damage that we can refer to is the new governance system that was formed post after Saddam Hussein was overthrown. So at this time, we see the introduction of a new governing system, otherwise known as the Muhassasa Ta'ifa, which basically means an ethno-sectarian quota system. So we see this one-man secular Sunni leader, and then we see this transition from various different leaders taking positions, all representing different entities, religious identities. And I would say that this moment of time, I wouldn't say this actually fueled sectarianism in the country. It just exacerbated the sectarian divide that already existed in the country. And during this time, we also see the introduction of de-Ba'athification, the disbandment of the army, and all of this combined triggered political turmoil, insurgency, and terrorism. And so at this moment of time, no one's interested in addressing environmental catastrophes in the country. The priority is to form a new government and fight against these insurgent groups and the rise of ISIS. And that leads me on to my next point. We see the emergence of a new threat, being ISIS. So for example, despite a successful counter-offensive in 2017, the environmental damage was long-lasting. An example, ISIS set fire to oil refineries and wells. One example being the sulfur plant north of Qaraya, where 35,000 tons of toxic substance was released into the air. And finally, we have the issue of Iraq's oil dependency, and this is a resource curse. It's difficult when you have this dependency to then transition into more sustainable forms of energy. And so, my previous visit to Iraq in 2022, I was up north in Dahok, and I could see the issue of gas flaring. And this is not only causing a surge in cancer cases, but this is also releasing black carbon, which is linked to air pollution, respiratory diseases, and emissions of methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas. So I now want to go on to the impact that climate change is having on women, if I have time. 3 minutes. So the climate change is having a number of impacts on women. And I think it's important to understand that climate change isn't, it's a global problem affecting both men and women, but women are suffering from the consequences of climate change much more than men. So if we look at, for example, the situation in the South, marshes in particular, villages and rural areas, women are regularly acting as guardians of natural and household resources. Women working in these circumstances are making the decisions. So for example, they're cooking for their families. They're the ones who are selecting food and fuel. They're working as farmers. They're influencing soil carbon emissions, and they're working as consumers, making purchase decisions. And one example that I want to talk about, the marsh Arabs and the marsh women in the South. And I want to pay particular attention to their lifestyle of buffalo breeding, for example. It's been an intrinsic part of many marsh Arabs, and particular women. So one point that I wanted to make is that when the previously mentioned resources are low, climate change becomes a stressor that actually intensifies women's vulnerabilities. So for example, when women don't have access to these resources, such as making and selling dairy products, this actually means that there's greater dependence on men to meet basic needs. But in recent years, in particular, with increasing temperatures, with both levels of precipitation and the decline of water, this has obviously declined throughout the years, and the livelihoods of buffalo breeders have been heavily impacted. And as a result, it's both men and women who have suffered, and this is now contributing towards high levels of poverty due to the climate change impacts. And just finally, I wanted to talk about other factors which have contributed towards women's vulnerability during times of climate crisis. First, limited access to basic human rights, such as the ability to move freely and acquire land. And this is actually preventing women from seeking refuge or finding employment in other areas. And finally, they're facing systemic violence that actually escalates during periods of instability. So for example, when women are being forced to travel long distances to find water for their families, they're actually at great danger here, because this is not only putting a strain on their health, it actually exposes them to the risk of harassment and violence by men. And many women who are taking these precarious journeys are witnessing the risk of miscarriage, infection due to issues of hygiene and health protection during pregnancy, or menstruation while seeking clean water. So these are just some of the factors in response to your question. And yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm very happy we have Baroness Nicholson back. You are uniquely placed because you are the Prime Minister's trade envoy for Iraq, amongst other places, but also you're the chair of the Ammar Foundation, which is an award-winning charity working with vulnerable communities in the Middle East to rebuild their lives. So I'd love to hear from you. We heard earlier about challenges facing women in the region, in Mosul and the Yezidi community, but I'd love to hear about the solutions and the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and thank you, dear colleague from the House of Lords. On my left is Andrew Methven, who's the Chief Executive of the Ammar Foundation. I don't have with me Christophe Michel, who runs the Iraq-Britain Business Council. Both of these are voluntary, not-for-profit, so they're charities, and I'm a volunteer in them. Now, the pressures and the challenges affecting all of us, females everywhere, are sadly identical. It's just a question of where they are and what the other pressures are. So if I could start with something that affects each and every one of us in this room, except one or two of the gentlemen, which is in fact employment, women's employment. And part of the reason I decided to start the Iraq-Britain Business Council was to get international businesses more readily into Iraq, on grounds that international businesses which follow the World Bank regulations offer very good staff facilities in terms of how they look after staff. And in many societies that I know well, and including some parts of Iraq, a woman may get a job, but then she will be very badly treated inside the job by some of the people who are actually controlling them, mainly men. So my purpose, actually fundamental purpose, in starting IBBC, which you can look up on the web, which now has about 70 major companies in it. Those companies have committed themselves, they wouldn't be allowed in otherwise, to following the World Bank standards. And World Bank standards mean equal opportunity for everyone and proper treatment when you get a job, proper jobs, proper holidays, and everything. I think that's one way of helping every society everywhere. I'm not suggesting it's perfect here or anywhere else, but that is the goal. And once you've got companies committed to that, and once they're doing it in other countries, so if they go wrong in the country you're in this case Iraq, they will have to be turned out by the World Bank. Of the other countries, they can't say any longer that they work with the World Bank in other countries. So I think this is a very important point. All of us, sadly, as women, we need work. And at whatever level, and we need proper pay, we need proper treatment, we need equal opportunity. And that I find comes with international highest standards. I recommend the World Bank standards. And if a company is agreed and endorsed by the World Bank, you know you're all right wherever you try to work with them. So one thing I have done was form IBBC, and that has actually surprisingly enough made hundreds and thousands of jobs now that we have 70 of the world's biggest companies in it. And the job growth that we've managed to create, therefore, through their efforts, and we support them, is actually something I'm very proud of. Then another thing that we all face as women is care for others, whether they're the sick, the elderly, or babies, or whatever else. And care for others has always seemed to me to rest upon the provision of basic health care. It does seem without basic health care, all sorts of other things fall apart in the caring you're doing for someone else, whether there's someone very ill, whether they're terminal illness, whether they're dying, whether they're just born, or whether they're young people. You need proper health care. So I founded the Ammar Foundation, named after Ammar. I couldn't spell then. I couldn't spell the name Ammar correctly, which isn't why it's so crazy. I didn't realize it had 3 A's in it. Absolutely, if not 4. I know, I got it entirely wrong, but that's what it's for. It means the first child we held. So the first thing I did, and I've never stopped doing this, is form primary health centers. And luckily in the Middle East, there's some wonderfully qualified people, men and women. I know it's very difficult indeed, for instance, in Iran, where I started work with Iraqi refugees and then Afghanistani refugees. It's very difficult indeed to have women nurses in the Middle East. It wasn't difficult to have women nurses in Iran. It's one of the good features, if I could put it that way around, of an otherwise rather chaotic society at the moment. So not at all difficult to get women nurses there, which is what, of course, is always needed. But when working in actually Arab states, this had to be slightly different. So that's been a little bit complicated. But nonetheless, I think so far we have set up, established, managed and staffed and run successfully about 75 primary health centers and several small hospitals. One big one, which is not yet running properly, probably too much for us, you know, we're at the small end of life. But that does mean that, for example, I believe primary health care is crucial, particularly, for example, immunization. So far, I think we've done 10.5 million immunizations in the south of Iraq alone, and 10.5 million basic health visits for people who wouldn't otherwise get it. Our aim in the Ammar Foundation is to go right down to the level of society that wouldn't actually get access to healthcare, because healthcare not being free, healthcare being in a society that is still highly corrupted, it does mean that a huge number of people can't afford to have even a grain of an aspirin. So all of our services are charitable services, and I think it's 10.5 million in one area alone. We started in Iran, in the refugee camps there. We moved into the marshes of Iraq in about 1990, illicitly, but that went very well. And then at the moment, we're doing a huge amount of work in exactly the same style with the refugees who are the people who've suffered from ISIS. These are Yazidis, but not only Yazidis. There are 190,000 still living in long stay camps. Ammar understands that because we've been working with the poorest of the poor in a number of countries for quite a long time now, 32 years, and not just in the Middle East, also in Europe. So we have a lot of experience of people in a dreadful situation, mothers, children, fathers, everything else. So we understand how to help people gather their strength again, get healthier, get some education, and so on. What we offer is therefore public health and education. And then wherever possible, we gather funding from companies and we offer training. We offer training, and we also offer, have been surprisingly successful and should do more of, helping women set up and run mini businesses so they can become self-sustaining. I go back to the need to earn a living. So we run classes when we have the funding. We've got about 6 different topics. And if you can get a lady and she joins the class for a year, by the end of it, she'll be able to run her own small business. And that is something which includes capacity to be safe while you get your resources, which is another difficult thing, and safe while you're selling your product. So safety is very important if you're a lady running an independent business. I would always advise, rather sort of, I mean, who am I to advise, but I would also always suggest that you try to be very, very careful with self-promotion. Self-promotion stirs up the wrong feelings from the wrong people. And that is just as much if I put a Twitter up, just as much, you know, as if it's a lady saying she can sell makeup and putting herself on television and then getting killed. I'm rather wary of self-promotion. I think it's a very dangerous tool. And I think the most important thing is what's best for the business, what's best for the family, what's going to be most effective. And that I think is absolutely crucial. So those are the sorts of things that I and my colleagues do in the Amar Foundation. We want all women and children and men, come to that, be healthy, wealthy and wise. We want people to be competitive on their own level and to succeed. And we do have some time, not enough, to manage with the arts. So with the Yazidis, for example, in the north, we've got the most wonderful choir going of Yazidi music with Yazidi instruments. And it's wonderfully psychologically and mentally and physically emboldening. Makes people feel a whole lot better. That arose because we saw that the Yazidis had special music, unique music. And it was interesting that ISIS had spotted that as well. And because it had not been notated ever, it was in the heads of the priests. And so the priests were being killed off. And I think we were down to about the last 11 priests. And once they'd gone, as of no notation, which is always so with ancient music, it's never notated. It's always too complicated. That's why it's not as simple as Western music. It's always more complicated. You can't notate it very easily. So with the permission of the Prince of the Yazidis, we spent a couple of years getting it properly professionally recorded with BBC equipment, and it's now stored so it can't be lost again in the Bodleian Library, and nobody gets at it unless the Prince asks for it. It's their music. You can't have copyright, alas, in Iraq or in many other countries, nor in China. Copyrights are a rather difficult thing. That's why we've stored it there, locked it up, and gave them the key. It's theirs. So music means a huge amount to everyone. And I tend to think, as a final comment, that we should concentrate much more on music for long-stay refugees. There are something like 190 million long-stay refugees, which means 11 years in camps with nothing except knowing how to queue up for a pack of dried food. What is that? There's no worship, there's no craft, there's no any sort of exhibitions, there's nothing. And probably you can't get out because you haven't got transport. So I think it's very important indeed to think how to unlock those people's potential, imagination and creativity. And that's our final thought. We run something called the Windsor Dialogue once a year, when we discuss all of this more academically with various different important people. Come and help.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, there are so many things that I think require a lot more exploration beyond this session today. So I hope everyone, will look up some of these wonderful initiatives that have been mentioned. And thank you so much for also reminding us that if women are to enter the workplace, they need to be healthy to be able to do that. So there's a very intimate link between your work on public health and work on economic empowerment. If I may just ask you a question, you mentioned training for women to set up their own businesses. Is there also a kind of microfinance initiative to provide them with funding for this, or how do they get the money?
No, I'm not in favor of microfinance.
Okay.
I've had too many instances when it gets stolen, and the poor ladies, when they're given a loan, obviously the first thing they do is pay off their debt. Well, any sensible person would do that, but then they're not meant to do that. And then they're, bitterly complained about because they do that. So I think microfinance is very confusing. And I also noticed that the chap who started it has got into big trouble. So I don't do microfinance.
So how do they get the resources to start businesses?
We do that.
Oh, you do that.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We're a charity. That's our job.
that's brilliant, because again,
So we go out with a begging bowl.
yeah, no, but I mean, this is very important to note, because a lot of other NGOs that provide training simply limit themselves to the training part. So you kind of have a case where people are skilled, but they don't have the resources to transform their skills into concrete action.
I think one has to think of these things rather like a ball of wool getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You can't just wave a wand and things happen. I think you start small, and surprisingly enough, bit by bit by bit, if you've got the formula correct, amazing things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And this leads me also to some of the things that Pari and Ruaa mentioned, which is the link between the humanitarian kind of angle and the development angle. And very often these two elements are separated in policy, but they're getting, I think, more and more intimately connected. But speaking of connections, I want to turn to Pari. Pari, I'm sure you were listening to Ruaa and thinking the same thing I was thinking, which is a lot of the issues Ruaa was talking about were similar to the things you were talking about in terms of the needs of the community, the needs of women, and the solutions that you are providing. One question I have, if you don't mind, how much interaction is there on these kinds of initiatives between the Yazidi community and other communities in Iraq? Because these are shared concerns.
It's funny that you're actually asking that, because we did apply for a grant. We were not successful, but I mean, we will try to use this proposal in the future. But so Yazidi women and Moslawi women would work together to ensure that their rights are adhered to. Like, for example, I think Zina is your name. You were talking about climate change and how much it has an effect on women in Iraq. Same is for Yazidi women in Sinjar and Moslawi women in Mosul. So there are a couple of things that we're trying to do to make sure that there is that working together. There is their understanding that we have the similar problems that exist, and how do we cope with these kind of problems? How do we deal with these problems? Maybe we can learn from each other. How did the Moslawis ensure that their streets were rebuilt much quicker than the Yazidi women from Sinjar? So all kind of things that we're trying to look for, and to cooperate with other civil society organizations to make sure that we make women in whole Iraq stronger, not only like looking at like our own community, because I think that once women stand together, they achieve much greater things.
Thank you so much. And another synergy that I also just saw, and again, I'm sure everyone in the audience agrees, is what Pari was talking about initially, about keeping basically the cultural heritage of the Yazidi community alive, and what you've just told us about music and the importance of this intangible cultural heritage in keeping communities feeling kind of comfortable, because it's not just about basic needs like being able to make a living. It's also about cultural nourishment and feeling that you can express yourself as a community through your music, for example, without restrictions. So I think sometimes again, in many policy conversations, perhaps there's so much focus on the economy and education, and of course all these things are important, but I think the issue of cultural heritage, whether tangible or intangible, can play a very important role. So thank you both for highlighting that. Ruaa, if you don't mind, I want to ask you, because you're also working on interfaith issues. So again, if you wouldn't mind, a similar question to what I asked Pari, how much are you working with communities outside Mosul, or is your work strictly to, kind of limited to the communities inside Mosul?
Thank you about your question, and it's very great point to talk about it. First of all, we are working inside Mosul at east and west area inside Mosul only. Then we expanded our dream. You know, what I talking about our team dream, and this dream will be bigger and bigger. Then we are working with outside of Mosul in different districts like Bashiqa, Bahzani, Al-Hamdaniya, and Bartalla, Al-Hadar, and it's a different area near of a lot of areas at near of Mosul. All of those areas, they have different situation. Then we need to work with it and we need to work with it with very very important. We need to be careful about all the points, because sometimes they have traditions, sometimes they have different background religion. Then we need to take care about all these points, because we need to rebuild the trust. The bigger problem about the disconnection between all those groups inside Mosul and outside Mosul and different group, it's about the trust, because they each one they couldn't trust others. Then how we can we build the trust again? Then we work with them step by step, try to find what the problem that they faced, how we can help them by the own fund, and or the fund that we can find it from the different NGOs or international NGOs, put it on the concept and try to make it, try to implement it. Then in one area we go there and there is no water, we try to make the water pipe. And other area they don't have electricity, then we try to buy the wires and try to make high communications with the inside Mosul Directorate to support this area with electrical services, and try day by day. They trust us, and we can work with us with the different projects. They have electricity, they have water, then they can go back to home. Then if they can't go back to home, how can they sustainable there? How can they stay at their places if they don't have a livelihood project, or if they don't have any business startup? Then we are working with this at that time with the business startup, making them giving them awareness, and then a workshop, and try to support those who really have a passion with the work, to give them the material that to start them own businesses. And really it's worked very, very well outside Mosul and inside Mosul. At the same point, talking about the Bashiqa, yes, there is unfortunately, and about there's a big farmer was destroyed by Daesh, and really we try to rebuild the trust again. We try to farming a lot of trees inside Bashiqa, and at the schools, at the mosque, at the church, and at all the very important places for Yazidi people, especially for Yazidi people. We make a high coordination with the Yazidi people, and to make us to give us the approval to go there, and farming as a Muslim people and the Christian people go to Bashiqa, to Yazidi people, to farming a lot of trees to instead of those damaged. and try to
Thank you. Just because we are, pretty short on time, I'm afraid we have to finish in 17 minutes or so. I just have a question for you, Zainab. You talked very clearly about the challenges. What about the solutions? Are there people in Iraq like Ruaa and Pari, but working on environmental issues? And maybe you could tell us about their work and maybe what they're doing.
Sure. So I do know a few NGOs who are working on addressing the climate change issues in the South, one of them being Nature Iraq. I've actually spoken to Jassim Al-Assadi, who is the co-founder of Nature Iraq, and unfortunately he was kidnapped a few months ago for his activism. And when I actually spoke to him a few months ago before his kidnapping, I was actually asking him questions about the project that he's working on in collaboration with a US-based artist, actually. Her name is Meridel Rubenstein. And what they've been doing is they've been building constructed wetlands to address the water shortages in the South in particular. And that project is actually complete now. It's up and running, and that project is, the aim is to provide support to, those who are suffering from the consequences of climate change. But moving forward, I think we need to integrate women into the climate space, because as I already mentioned before, climate change it doesn't just affect men, it affects women. And as I already mentioned before as well, it's affecting women more than it is affecting men, because women are actually on the field, they're the ones who are extracting the sources. So I think moving forward, yes, it's great we have all these NGOs and they're working on these projects, and with COP28 on the way in Dubai, I think we need to make greater efforts with inviting women into these climate change discussions. And I actually do have a few suggestions moving forward, a few proposals. One of them being to ensure female involvement, including Native women and grassroots groups in climate change mitigations and resource management. Second, we need to include women in the creation of policies and strategies around environmental protection, including disaster response, building resilience, securing land and inheritance rights, food and resources, and ending poverty. Third, we need to develop policies to address climate change that recognize gender-sensitive impacts. As I already mentioned, women are traveling miles to obtain clean, safe drinking water, and along the way, they're facing systemic violence, whether that's in the form of harassment and other atrocities. And, we should be inviting women to take part in conferences, events. Those who are specializing in the field can, provide their suggestions, their policy recommendations. I remember back in 2019, I was at the LSE Middle East Center working on a water project with Dr. Michael Mason, who's the director of the LSE Middle East Center. And we actually worked on a project addressing water issues in the South. And we looked at 2 water treatment plants and what work can be done to rehabilitate the water treatment plants that have been affected by, the US invasion and acts of terrorism. And afterwards, we produced a policy brief, and it was my trip in 2021 to Iraq at the American University of Kurdistan conference where I actually presented the paper. And that was a great opportunity for me to speak to policymakers and government officials who are actually there in the room and, provide some of our recommendations. And afterwards, I did have a few policymakers and government officials who are very interested in the work that we did. And so we need to invite women who specialize in this field. And finally, my suggestion moving forward is that we need to invest in technologies and initiatives to enhance sustainable and renewable energy sources that reflect women's knowledge. So for example, marshland women have had years of, knowledge in terms of collecting water, harvesting, and so we need to address their needs and roles while also incorporating native expertise and traditional practices. So yeah, those are my recommendations.
Thank you. I think you'd like to add something to that.
Thank you very much. I'm a little bit more of a skeptic on on the whole issue of climate change. For example, when you talk about water, when you talk about lack of water, the first thing really to think about is broken pipes and the leakages of water in many countries. I know that the leakage of water in Iraq, for example, is something like 69 or 79%. And that is because the pipes haven't been mended and that new pipes are not lined. You can line pipes now before they're put in, they will never leak again. It's very easy for pipes to leak. In my previous Devon constituency, which is very wet all the time, we were losing nearly 30% of water, but they really had to address that before they started complaining about climate change. These are the things we can do ourselves. And I think if I were talking to policymakers about this, I would suggest to the policymakers that they give you their plan on how they are looking after pipes, what they're doing to mend the pipes, and what they're doing to put in new pipes, because that's basically why Iraq is short of water.
And I think I also want to add to Baroness, your comment here. As I already mentioned earlier, I don't know if you were in the room or outside, but environmental issues in Iraq, particularly, hasn't been seen as a priority. It's not on the top of the list. So there has been many years of mismanagement, many years of negligence, and I think now is the time to really prioritize these issues, as you already mentioned, the pipes which do need repairing, pipes that do need to be restored.
Yeah.
Yes, I put forward the marshes for a global prize many years ago, and eventually it got through UNESCO. But all I mean is that the practical side of climate change is much grander to talk about climate change than it is actually to get down to sorting out the pipes.
Yeah.
And that's what every nation should look at.
Absolutely. And in addition, in Iraq, of course, a lot of the damage is to do with human practices at the local level, such as factories polluting rivers, for example. So again, it's also about the political kind of context sometimes enabling these kinds of practices to happen. And so again, the solution is not necessarily under the traditional climate change umbrella, but it's to do with having environmental.
All I meant was that as voters, and everybody has votes in most places now, as voters you can do things much more effectively locally than you may realize. You have more power, more authority than you actually realize.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to turn very quickly to Ruaa and Pari, and then spend the last 10 minutes getting the audience to ask any questions that they may have. So my questions to both of you, taking advantage of the setting, we are here in the UK being hosted by, two baronesses. What should the international community do to make things better? Either for your own work or for what you think Iraq still needs. How can we help more? Ruaa, I'm gonna start with you. Try to just make it short, please, just because of time limitations.
In generally, to be honest, there is a lot of NGOs give a very important hand at a critical time after the liberation of ISIS till now. But to be honest, now there's no foundation there's no fund from the NGOs. Almost NGOs was working outside of Nineveh, but it's a good point. Good to talk about the common challenges faced inside the Mosul now. It's the first one. It's the economical issue or economical empowerment for the youth, for the women, for the people. There's a lot of people, they don't have any job, they are jobless. There's no salary. We try to give them a new opportunity by a workshop, by awareness, or but it's out of our hand, to be honest. We couldn't support them more than awareness or more than a very simple items. And the second thing, it's about the legal services. There's a lot of people. Unfortunately, approximately there's 200,000 lawsuits in the court suspended because there's no no, any case it's need payment, and this law consultation, it's expensive. A little bit. Then if there is any support for the law side also, it will be good to support the people to have them rights, and at the same time NGOs working with mental health, working with a lot of health issue belongs to this reason, because they have a lot of because they have maybe cases on the court suspended, and that will push them to be aggressive or push them to be working with them children with not on the good way. But if we can work on this point from the top to find the solution for the case by support law services for the people, it will be a good point for
wonderful. Thank you so much, Ruaa. Pari, very briefly, over to you. What do you think we could do here in the international community?
Thank you very much. If we look at just the UK, I think that UK is always at the forefront speaking about women's issues and how to combat sexual violence, etc. But unfortunately, the support has been very minimal from just a Yezidi perspective. Working over the last 10 years, there's not much support gone to Yezidi women in Iraq. And when I talk about like support, I'm not talking about the handout here or there. I'm really talking about how can we think about something that would work and generate income for these women? How can we economically empower these women so that the UK doesn't have to come back in 5 or 10 years and give more money? We need to think about very structured programs that would empower these women to do so. I'm hopeful that the UK is going to do more. We're in talk with UK officials, and yeah, we really look forward to working together, especially since 900 ISIS members were from the UK, and some of them have committed horrendous crimes against Yazidis that we are aware of. So we do expect the UK to take some responsibility in that sense.
Thank you so much for reminding us of that. It is definitely a very important point. We all share a responsibility here. And let's not forget that the invasion of 2003 was not just a US invasion. It was also a UK invasion. So I have 9 minutes left. I'm going to take perhaps just a couple of questions, if anyone in the audience, because we need to leave this room very, very, very soon. If anyone has questions, raise your hand. I'll take a couple. One here and one there. And okay, oh gosh, you know what? I'm gonna do gender parity and take one woman and one man. Let's have your question and yours. Yeah, please start and then we'll turn to you. Yeah. Sorry, you had your hand raised.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sana Hassan, Iraqi journalist. My question is, we all talk about climate change issues. The first thing that when we talk about water, but in Iraq, water is not just the only issue that we struggle from. There's so many like oil company who work beside the marshes area in general. They affect on the environment, they affect on water, they affect on life of people. So as a journalist or as an organization, how we can talk more or work more about these issues, because everyone just talk about water, no one talk about other issues. Like when we talk about oil companies in general who invest there in marshes area or any area in Iraq,
okay,
no one care about this kind of.
All right, so beyond water and
Andrew, so my very quick question is actually for Pari. You mentioned the Yazidi survivors law. I'd just be grateful for a sort of very quick sort of half sentence on, do you think that's actually working and delivering what it's supposed to do? Or it's not getting through, people are frustrated?
Okay, let's start with the climate issue and then we move on to Pari and we can then close. Yeah.
So in response to your question, I understand that water isn't the only issue in Iraq. We have the issue of, as I mentioned, gas flaring And I already mentioned that this is causing a surge in cancer cases. And I think moving forward, we need to actually put in more efforts, focus more on documenting what's actually happening. And I know that there have been recent efforts to document such, health consequences and the environmental impact that it's having on Iraq. For example, there was a BBC documentary which covered the issue of gas flaring in Iraq and the link between gas flaring and cancer cases in the country. And it was actually that documentary, I wouldn't say just that documentary by itself actually made people realize the seriousness of the issue, but actually made people more aware of the consequences that it's having on the country. And I think more work needs to be done documenting those issues and actually getting people to talk about these issues, as I say, COP28, all these climate initiatives, all these climate projects. Just kind of like amplifying our voices and getting more involved in projects which can, address such issues. Yeah.
Thank you. And Pari, over to you.
Thank you for that question. The Yazidi survivors law was the idea that there would be some form of reparation from the Iraqi government to the Yazidi survivors. I think one key thing that we've been always mentioning, and it's again a perspective from a Yazidi woman-led organization, is that we need to make sure that anything the women can access through this law, and specifically funds, we need to make sure that those funds are actually being used for the bettering of their own lives. We are a very patriarchal community, so it is most of the time the men that make decisions, the men, all the money goes to the men in the household. And these reparations are that the women get a pass, and with that pass they can get some funds from the bank. How do we ensure that those funds are actually being used to ensure that the women have access to activities that would improve their lives? We are in talks with IOM from the UN about financial literacy for women survivors, to ensure that they are aware that this is their money, this is for them to improve their lives. What are their goals? How can we ensure that these survivors actually use that money for a better future?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Did you want to add anything?
I wonder if sometime we might discuss the comment about it's all Britain's fault because we invaded. We can't discuss that now because we've got very little time, but I do think it's worth discussing. Having been part of the whole thing from the very beginning, I've given loads and loads and loads of knowledge and evidence, and I just think this is something we really ought to iron out, because it's obviously very hurtful both ways. Britain was begged to get rid of Saddam Hussein. Britain helped get rid of Saddam Hussein, and that was now seen to be the wrong thing. So would you have preferred to keep Saddam Hussein? And in any case, the decision came from Iraqis resident in America, who persuaded the Republican Party to do it, they very heavyweight. So I think sometime it might be worth ironing that out. You might end up with totally different views or stronger views of your own at the moment. I'm not suggesting there's an answer, but I do think it's a pity to have an undisclosed grief. Much better to get it out in the open.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we have to raise it because it happened, regardless of the motivations. Fact is, we were involved, here we are now. And I think, that has to be acknowledged. But yes, I agree with you. There's a lot to be said about that, maybe in another session. But for today, I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you to the really wonderful, thoughtful, informative interventions by all the participants today. Thank you for the questions. Thanks for the audience. Thanks for hosting us, Baroness Hodgson. And hopefully this will be the, one of many conversations about Iraq and women. And lovely to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Can I add my last point, please?
We're finished.
I don't think anybody can actually see us at all.
I'm sorry if can I add the last point or not, or could it?
Clap her. Well done. Well done.
Oh,
Stay hard down the line.
What's going on?
Say something.
Oh, okay. Well, do we have a couple of minutes? Okay, say something quickly and then.
yes, quickly and briefly. About the climate change, we are working as Muthabarun Al-Khair, we are working to on this subject from the summer. And first of all, we are working with cleaning for Tigris River and try to push the people not to use the water a lot. And at the same time, we are making a new step that there's no any volunteer team make it. We are sitting with the governorate inside the Mosul city and who specialize with the water and responsibilities working with the water to talk about the all the laws for the relevant for the water and for the water and the lack of the water that maybe will happen maybe in the future.
Well, I'm afraid we really have to go now. But thank you so much. And yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.